Well, hello there.
Good, sir. How are you?
Oh man, I'm great. How are you? Actually,
I am better. It's been a difficult stretch. As you know, I have a 14-month-old granddaughter who was very sick, and she was hospitalized for several days. But the good news and the good Lord have blessed us with her being able to come out of the hospital, and she's doing better. Her two sisters contracted the virus that she had as soon as she got home, but given that they're a little bit older than her, it was not as severe, and everybody's on the mend, so I can breathe again.
thank God. What do you know what it was? What was it, like a
You know,
RS
it's
something?
not super clear. It was a virus that caused her blood sugar to plummet dangerously low, to the point where at any given moment she could have she could have had some significant health setbacks and seizures,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's why they kept her in hospital. She couldn't keep anything down, so it was scary. It was scary for her parents. It was scary for me.
I'm so sorry
But
to that. I'm so sorry, and I know that our guest today also has dealt with some family illness issues, so this speaks right to his heart. I'm assuming that is correct, Mr. Carl.
Absolutely. You can only be as happy as your least happy child, or in your case, grandchild. I don't have any grandchildren yet, so I'm sure that's the same.
Wow, that's actually.
yeah, well, we're going to need to lift people up because that's a pretty depressing way to start a
Yeah,
podcast.
boy,
Well, I
what a
guess
way
I
to
guess the
open, guys.
yeah. Well, on the bright side, everybody's well.
There you
We are in a couple of weeks. My daughter and her family, myself, my girlfriend, and her kids are going on a cruise, and so we are looking forward to that. And everybody's getting the ickies out of their systems at just the right time, so we can go forward and have a great time on the
I
cruise.
I didn't get the tickets for the cruise that you bought me.
I apologize for that.
The mail must be wrong
It's
again.
terrible nowadays.
I'm
It's
sorry.
terrible. Can't unreliable.
Send pics, please.
You
So,
got it.
how about this? Why don't we bring in our wonderful guest today? Because, he's awesome. So, would love to bring him in part of the conversation. Today, folks, we have Mr. Carl Grant III as our esteemed guest today. And for many years, he's led the firm-wide business development team at one of the largest and most well-respected business law firms in the world called Cooley, a firm known for assisting clients and connecting with sources of angel investment, venture capital, and private equity, as well as connecting clients with potential management team members, advisors, independent board members, prospective partners, customers, and other value add members of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, or as everyone else says, ecosystem. As global head of business development, the firm's annual revenue grew under his steering from $310 million to over $2 billion. And he also spent a good bit of time over at Price Waterhouse Coopers as well. He served on over a dozen boards in his distinguished career. Nowadays, Carl is CEO of Capital Raise and Connexa Holdings, as well as the chairman of the Cationic Mineral Formulations and partner in Superconnector. Overcoming significant adversity in the form of not only his wife's, but his children's illnesses, Carl has turned his passion for a cure into patented technology that is now a part of his latest startup. Recently, he's published his wonderful book, How to Live the Abundant Life, available on Amazon and, well, as well as in Barnes & Noble, and we're excited to talk to him about that. A father of five, Carl is a man of faith. He is the founder of the South by Southwest Sunday Service and the High Tech Prayer Breakfast in DC Metro, High Tech Prayer Breakfast, DC Metro Inc. Carl, Tal and I are very happy to have you joining us today on the Braving Business Podcast.
Thanks, PJ. Thanks, Tal. Happy to be here.
Yeah, Carl, thanks for being here. Obviously, you and I met some years back when I was with one of my startups, and you were at Cooley at the time, and I was grateful and impressed with the amount of time you spent with me. Frankly, you didn't know me, you didn't know anything about me, and my startup was not yet at that point anything that would merit your attention. But you were very generous with your time, and that stuck with me. And when you published this book, which sits, I think, perfectly with what we are about here at the Braving Business Podcast, it seemed like a no-brainer to reach out to you and ask you to join us here on the show. And I'm so grateful that you agreed to do that.
I appreciate it.
So, Carl, you have had a really interesting and diverse life. You had some startups, including a couple that imploded very early on in your career. Many of us in entrepreneurships have had that experience. You then helped scale one of the world's biggest business law firms' revenues. can you walk us through a couple of pivotal moments that defined your path from early entrepreneurship to where you wound up prior to your more recent adventures with capital raising Connexa?
Sure. I've got entrepreneurialism in my blood. It's what I wanted to do right out of grad school. And so did a bootstrap startup with my dad. A lack of funding was what kept us from ultimately growing that company to what we wanted it to be. So really the whole theme of the rest of my career was all about accessing capital and making that capital available to entrepreneurs. Even to this day, we've got a platform called Capital Raise that helps companies raise capital. So I did 2 venture-backed startups in the early 2000s. And as you mentioned, they imploded. And, with the 5 kids on the way, my wife wasn't too happy with me burning through startups. They were cool startups. One was the first company to put video over the internet. If you can believe it, that was only 24 years ago. And here we are doing a video podcast. We were doing 1 frame per second motion JPEG, and we raised $36 million off of that. Unfortunately, the market cratered the month we got the money, March of 2000. And so after the second one blew up, my wife said, how about you don't do any more startups while I'm raising all these kids? So I obliged. I spent most of my career in professional services, with Cooley for a long time. And now I'm doing consulting work. I'm doing consulting work for other law firms, showing them how I did what I did over there. I'm training associates, I'm training business development people, and I'm writing plans and helping execute plans, not as an employee, but as a consultant. And it's a lot of fun.
Very, very cool. So I have 2 questions. One, back on what you said. So you kind of went through 2 implosions of startups. Your wife is begging you, hey, hello, we got a house full of people here. What was that like? How did you, was she a part of it? Like, was she working side by side with you, or were you off on your own trying to create this kingdom while she took care of the home kingdom? Like, how did that work?
Well, we had decided while we were dating that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And a lot of guys don't let their wives do that these days, or wives their husbands. I mean, there's a lot of, 2-person working families, which is fine, but you got to agree on that ahead of time. And so she wanted to be a traditional mom. And so I wanted to support her in that. And so interestingly, when we got married, I was doing a startup, was working on deferred income, and then I took a job because she had a baby, and I could go way back, and I can remember I was only making $30,000 a year in that first job, and she was making 65,000. So she was making more than twice as much as me in the early days, and I let her leave her job to come home with me having a $30,000 a year job, if you can imagine that. And things were tight, but the day after she came home, I got a 50% pay increase. And somehow, you mentioned I'm a person of faith. Somehow it worked out that with every child we had, we got a financial blessing, a promotion, an increase, a new job, and to the point where I was doing pretty well there through the thick of raising the 5 kids. And so I went from having 1 vacation a week that I couldn't afford to take to having 7 paid weeks of vacation at Cooley, which was really nice.
Oh, that's awesome.
As you started your career, I know that one interesting fact about you is that your first startup was with your father, who's also named Carl, and then your most recent startup is with your son, who's also named Carl. So I see a pattern here. But tell us, what was it like to work with your dad, and what is it like to work with your son?
Well, with my dad, it was interesting because we're kind of doing the same thing my son and I are doing, where you have 2 interchangeable people with the same name. And so I would develop relationships via the phone. Back then there was no email. So it was the early days of email. It was just coming out. And so I would cultivate the relationships, and then he would go in, with a little bit of gray hair and be able to close deals. And we have a little bit of the same thing going on with my son and me. I developed an amazing investor network over the course of my career. And so he's pretty much inherited my investor network, and he's building his own relationships, but he's trading off of the name, which is nice.
Wow. And how does that when you start working with family, this is something that I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs do, right? There's a dream, hey, I want to work with family. And then of course, on the flip side, you hear never work with family. How did you guys like go into this with like some rules in place, or like how did you make it work and be successful?
Well, so with my dad, I felt obligated to try to make this thing work, right? And I was there for 4 years, and it was kind of the school of hard knocks for me. I learned everything I didn't learn in graduate school doing it with my dad. Um, but because I felt obliged to stick with it, I almost missed, missed starting a family, right? So I got married, you know, had a baby, and that wasn't really conducive to the startup life. And so I had to tell my dad it was time for me to go. So I don't want to do that to my son where he feels obliged to stay with something. So I told him actually this morning, as committed as he is, I said, I don't ever want you to feel trapped in this business. So if you get the inkling that you want to do something else, just let me know. Right. And so I don't want him to feel that he has to stay at it out of obligation to me. I think we have got a bright future with the business, but at the same time, I know he has aspirations to do other things, so I don't want to tie his hands.
It's interesting, as someone whose son has shared with me, we don't share the same, actually, his first name is my middle name. Um, but he's named after my grandfather. And he shared with me that, being my son was a little daunting. And he's not working with me, he's still in college. Whereas your son is working with you, and you obviously accomplished a ton in your career, and your name carries tons of cachet, and among many, many people in the circles you travel in, that I travel in. How is it like for him? I mean, has he spoken to you about feeling, I mean, the sons of or daughters of, that's a difficult thing. Have you guys discussed that at all?
Yeah, I think he can do more than he thinks he can do. I know he can do more than he thinks he can do, and so I constantly challenge him to step up and do things he doesn't think he's capable of, and it pushes him a bit, but I know he can do it. I know he's got the DNA to do it, right? Sometimes you're scared to try something you haven't done, and the best thing to do is to do it scared and get over it. And so it was that way with public speaking for me. I was terrified to speak in public. Now you can't get me to shut up, right? I've overcome the fear, and I'm happy to get up in front of a crowd. And so I'm doing the same type of thing for him.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. So if you don't mind, we'll take a step back here for a second. You've shared with us that you faced a lot of these personal health challenges with your family, at home, and turning that adversity into some patented technology, which is incredibly inspiring. I love how you see that as an impetus of doing something good in the world. Can you take us through that journey and what the emotional and logistical challenges were that you faced?
Yeah, so my wife went undiagnosed for years, misdiagnosed. She had Lyme disease, and Lyme disease is kind of it's a disease that's hard to pin down. I think there's a lot of different symptoms that people have, and they lump it all into Lyme disease. And I think there's several diseases that are all part of that same disease category. Like chronic fatigue syndrome, and there's a lot of names. And so I usually listen to the symptoms that people have, and I can spot what they have. But with my wife, she was bedridden for 3 years. That was hard. I mean, when I think back to those 3 years, there were many times where I had plans with her to go to a business event, and she just couldn't get out of bed. She just could not commit to doing things and be able to go. I remember going on a trip overseas, and we were at a really nice place, and she stayed in bed the whole time. And so when I say bedridden, it wasn't like she never left the house. She would leave and then she would get in bed. And so it was just really, really hard. And we knew two of our children had it as well. We didn't realize all of them had it. So one of the things that we learned through this journey is Lyme disease is actually communicable from one person to another. We didn't know this at all when we started out. We thought it was just a tick bite like everybody else. But those spirochetes that comprise Lyme disease, they actually live in your saliva. And so you could share toothbrushes or silverware or kiss, or I don't know the extent to which you have to, exchange fluids, but we see whole families that present with Lyme disease. And so it wasn't until she went to a chiropractor, and the chiropractor treated so many people that had aches and pains. And he said, I think you have Lyme disease. And then, it's kind of a boring topic. I mean, we went to more Lyme specialists than I care to talk to you about. Most of them are honestly, well, they're not frauds, but they don't really have a cure. I mean, they'll charge you a lot of money and they'll make you feel better, but they don't get you better because none of the things in the marketplace kill the disease. I happen to, by the grace of God, stumble upon a mom and pop life sciences company that was able to kill the Lyme disease, and so we set out to patent that technology, and we did through an organization called Lyme Revive Foundation. And as it turns out, it has applications for other diseases, and we've licensed those non-Lyme related applications to another company that is in the process of commercializing those. So we've actually had some clinical data, some independent clinical data come back that we are able to kill a previously thought to be incurable disease. I don't want to get into the details of it here, but we're making great strides, and we're really excited about it because we have the opportunity more than anything else to do good in the world. Yes, money comes with these types of innovations, but that's not really the driving factor behind this, right? It's more about helping people. The last thing we want to do is have our technology acquired by a big pharma that puts it on the shelf because they're making more money with things that make people feel better but don't get them better.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts and a comment. One, I happen to have gone through a somewhat similar experience. My wife of many years contracted breast cancer. And it was a pretty significant case, and late. She survived, fortunately, but for about a year, she was more or less bedridden, and we had young children at home. So my question is, you had young children at the time. How was that like for them, and do they remember that time?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. I mean, so it's a really hard topic because I had children who were self-medicating, and one of them got addicted to opiates. Was a really rough time, and we fortunately we got through that. I had other children who were suicidal. We had to pull kids out of school and put them on homebound. It really set one of our children back academically. So it was a trial, and the trial continues on in terms of kind of the reverberations of what we went through, right? That the one child that really was behind in learning, really, she's doing great, but she wasn't able to finish college, and she really had to struggle through some stuff. So yeah, I mean, all in all, we're great now, but dealing with suicidal kids is, going to bed not knowing if your child's going to be alive when you wake up. I mean, I had the cutting in the arms, that just some of the horrible things that people will do when they're suffering. I went through all of that.
Yeah, that's first of all, kudos to you for your inner strength and the strength of your family. Obviously, they faced a lot, they went through a lot, you dealt with a lot, but you all pulled through, right? So that's a fantastic tale of perseverance, of keeping the faith, and of just really digging deep and making sure that you guys survive one day at a time. So kudos to you for
somehow, PJ, I managed to drag the whole family, as sick as they were, to church every Sunday. And I remember distinctly one Sunday, it was actually a church I planted in Lovettsville, Virginia, where the pastor and the elders of the church laid hands on and prayed over my wife for healing. It's one of these things that you read about in the Bible that they did back in the old days. They anoint you with oil, and they put their hands on you. And I have to believe that some of the cure that we got came through those efforts, right? Because we were praying for her to get better, and sometimes God will deliver those cures through, not what you would expect, right? I didn't expect to happen upon a startup company that said, "Oh, we can kill it," and I didn't believe them at all when they told me they could. And in fact, when they sent me the stuff via FedEx, I said, "You're not taking that. I don't even know what's in there." And she said, "Life as it is not worth living. I'm going to try it. Maybe it'll work. And, sure enough, I watched her go from being stuck in bed with, we had horses at the time on our property. Those horses were just fending for themselves out there. She went from not being able to get out of bed to riding 5 horses a day and wearing herself out, getting back in bed saying, I don't think I'm better. I'm like, no, you're better. You're better. And the other thing she did that I wrote about this in my book was she, when she finally came out of her fog, she realized she hadn't done anything to keep up the house in 3 years. She was the one who did everything. And she realized that the carpets were disgusting and the walls were disgusting. And so she tore up all of our carpet. And not her personally. She paid, I think she spent $65,000 in 2 weeks. I'm like, I can't afford you to be better. You have to get back in bed. She tore up all the carpets, put in hardwood floors, and put backsplashes in the kitchen, and replaced all of our appliances. I'm like, no, no more.
That's funny. That's
Yeah.
funny. Well, look, first of all, it's PJ said it, and he started touching on it, and I'm glad you went there. There's inner strength for sure. Inner strength comes from somewhere, and in your case, it comes from faith. And we're not a religious podcast, although we've had some really interesting people on the podcast that also have spoken about their faith. I think what's always fascinating to me, and I don't know you well. I know you a little bit, and I did not know that history. I've now been exposed to it through the book and through preparing for this podcast. It was really interesting is here's a man who, I mean, PJ, this guy was at the top of the pyramid, right? The top of the food chain. And you'd be looking at him and assuming, I want to be him. I want to have his life, right? But the reality is that behind closed doors, you don't know what people deal with. And so, again, I think that's a yet another in a long list of guests that we've had here that overcame harrowing things on their path. So I know faith's been a really big part of your life, is a really big part of your life. And I'd love to tie that back into business. I'd love to understand, how do you integrate faith into your business practices?
That's a really interesting question because I had to grapple with this. I was an atheist, Tal. I grew up with nothing, right? In Reston, Virginia, where just nobody ever talked about God, nobody ever prayed. It was just I was the center of the universe as far as I knew until I was age 24, and I was in the middle of graduate school. And I remember going. I wasn't living my life in the way that I wanted to live it. I was trying to change it, and really kind of the light bulb went off when I was on an army mission in Panama. And our soldiers we were the first ones to stay in a hotel after we had invaded Panama. And I said to the soldiers in my unit, what are you guys doing tonight? And they said, well, we're going to pursue these prostitutes here right out the front door. And I was trying to make some changes in my life, and that didn't seem like a good idea. So I turned to a guy who was with our unit for training that week. His name was Wayne from Mississippi. I said, what are you doing tonight, Wayne? He said, I think I saw some lights down the road. It looks like they're having a church service over there. So literally I had, 2 options. Well, really 3. I could have gone back to my room, but I didn't want to do that. Prostitutes or church. And so I chose church. And that was really, won't go into the details, but it was really kind of the turning point in my life. And so I went back to graduate school, Tal, and I knew I had to be in church after this experience. And I started going to church. I became a believer. I was baptized, received the Bible, and I started reading it. And that Bible contradicted everything I'd ever believed in life. And so I have business books. I've got, Machiavelli I'm studying, in Power of Persuasion and Ethics, and I've got the Bible. And I'm like, all right, how do I deal with this, right? Because the teachings of Jesus are radical. I mean, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. He who wishes to be first must be last and servant of all. That one blew my mind. Who doesn't want to be first? But I had to think about what does last and servant of all look like. And Tal, maybe that's a little bit of what you experienced in interacting with me, right? I try to be a servant to the folks I worked with. And so the only way I could picture this was when you're in the Army and you're going through the chow line, the officer doesn't eat first. He or she eats last. He makes sure his soldiers are fed before him. And so that was the picture I had in my mind, to be last and servant of all, right? If there was no food left, I didn't eat. And so I tried to take those practices that I learned about in the Bible and apply them in the business world. And you know what? They worked. I mean, if you do to others as you would have them do unto you, it really comes back to you, right? If you bless others, you in turn are blessed. And that was really the secret to my success over all those years.
That's awesome. There is a joke in there whenever you mix in a sentence prostitutes and church, but I'm going to leave that one go. You did though. You did.
I think
though.
I made the right choice, PJ. I think I did.
I'm wondering, PJ, what do you think you would have done? Don't answer that question.
Yeah, no. I think we all know what I would have done. Anyway, so you had mentioned about this person who was actually there, clearly guided, right?
Wayne, it sounds like Wayne, if I recall. Yep.
Mississippi, right? And you also had mentioned about advising against carrying burdens alone. And so, you know, everyone needs some support there. And it looked like Wayne was there, maybe not so much as a support vessel, but more as a contemplative vessel. And so in the context of not carrying burdens alone, and in the context of entrepreneurship, how do you feel business leaders can effectively share the load of what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis without losing their sense of ownership and direction?
Well, you know, you mentioned that I started this thing called the High Tech Prayer Breakfast, and I started that for a pure reason, but I didn't realize it was going to be probably the best business networking organization I could ever develop, right? Because when you form an organization like that of, you know, presumably like-minded people, you start to develop real relationships. And this goes to your question, PJ, because these relationships weren't just, hey, you know, what can you do for me? I can do this for you. The kind of things that go on in business. These were real relationships where you know, Tal, you know, when your grandchild was sick, you know, in that organization, we had the types of relationships where you say, hey, you know, my grandchild's sick. Will you pray for my grandchild, right? Having that kind of support network was incredible because these were real relationships. And so, you know, people would call me and I would call them, you know, and we were able to be more vulnerable with each other and be more real because we were connecting on a level that wasn't just, you know, oh, I'm this business guy, successful business guy. No, we're all getting through this thing called life. And so we would meet and talk, and the discussions weren't just business. They were faith and family and struggles. And during that time that I was struggling with those sicknesses, I had a support network like you would not believe, right? I couldn't imagine doing that as a, you know, a solo out there, you know, all by myself. I had people coming alongside me and helping me, praying over us, and ultimately, you know, seeing us through this whole thing. And then we've turned around and we've been able to do that for others. My wife, her whole life now is about healing, helping people get better.
It's beautiful, and it resonates with me. And I'm a person of faith, but not the most religious person. I don't talk about my faith very much. I will say that, you know, I've advocated on the podcast for people to find something, a higher power, or something that gives them great meaning and connects them to others. I think it's really critical, particularly in this day and age, and the more technology we have, the more critical it becomes, to have real human connection based on values, based on principles, based on a shared vision for what life's about, which leads me to the book that you wrote, How to Live the Abundant Life. I'd love for you to tell us what prompted you to write this book, and, you know, can you share one or two core principles from it that you think people can apply to their lives?
Well, Tal, I always knew I had a book in me. You know, it's one of these things that in getting it out of me wasn't the easiest thing. I started to the idea of writing a book was so daunting. So I started writing essays, and I published some of those essays on my LinkedIn because you know, they were sitting on my computer. They weren't doing any good. And then to develop more content, I did some podcasts and I interviewed people. I had one podcast called Faith at Work, another one called Rainmakers. And so I got a little bit of faith, a little bit of business, and I was, you know, getting those transcripts to get more material. And I really pulled it all together. I hired a publishing company to help me pull it all together, right? I had a bunch of stuff I had written, I had a bunch of ideas, and they do these things, on an ongoing basis. They know the drill. And so they help me force it into an outline and force it into a flow, where they would give me questions, I would answer the questions, they would have have me write the answers to the questions, then speak the answers to the questions, and then it turned into a book. And so really I pivoted it from a business book to a self-help book, because I wanted to be able to address not just business people. I wanted to be able to address retired people, stay-at-home moms, and college students. So I start out with talking about finding your purpose. A lot of us walk around life without a purpose, and so I talk about how do you know what your purpose is in life, and give some good ideas to do that. How to maintain a sound mind. So many of us think that we just have to think whatever negative thoughts pop into our mind. We don't. And I give tools for overcoming those things, how to grow spiritually, how to maintain a healthy body. And I try to break it down into something that's simple and achievable. Personal growth, how to set goals for yourself, but then take bite-sized pieces of those goals so they don't seem insurmountable, and then accomplish things such as writing a book or learning to fly an airplane or whatever it is you want to do. Developing and maintaining personal relationships. Without relationships, we're lone wolves. I mean, I wouldn't have done well without relationships in my life. How to establish boundaries. That's another really important thing, especially once you get a big network and you're out there helping people. If you don't have boundaries, people will take all of your time away from you. How to be likable, how to develop a legacy, and to be part of a community. And so those are all things that I address in the book. And, it seems to be striking a chord. It's the craziest thing, Tal. I went to Saudi Arabia on a trip with this delegation over the past 2 weeks, and I met a government official over there who, when I walked up, he said, "Carl Grant," he goes, "I'm reading your book." I couldn't believe it. I sent an email to a guy. I do some consulting work for Morrison and Forster, and there was a gentleman who had just raised $5 million for a company dealing with breast cancer, and I thought it was really interesting. I wanted to get a meeting with him, but I met him in 2008. I sent him an email, being as friendly as I could and talking about how we met way back when. And you know what he did? He sent me an email back. "I love your book." I don't know who else read this book, but it's crazy when you go around about in your life and people have actually read your book. And so,
Carl, I don't know that I told you this, but do you know how I knew that you wrote a book?
How'd you know?
I was on an airplane and the person next to me was reading your book.
No way.
Yes.
It's surreal, Tal.
Yes. And I was like, "Oh my God, Carl Grant III." That's it. First of all, it's an unforgettable name. Second of all, I remember how kindly you treated me, and I recognized your photo, and I was like, "This is insane." And then I reached out to you.
It is.
So,
yeah. Well, that's my new existence. I didn't know when I was sitting writing this thing, Tal. I didn't know that anybody would even read it. I mean, I didn't know anybody would care, but apparently they do.
That's how I felt when we started this podcast. It's amazing. I guess when you put your heart out there and you're genuine, it resonates with at least some people.
You strike a chord, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things I was going to mention is that I don't think Carl has said in his adult life, "I'm bored," because he's been doing a whole bunch of stuff. So you're writing books, but you're also taking big old swings at entrepreneurialism at the same time. And you're just going for it, which I laud. I think it's fantastic. And so, you're a CEO, you're exploring M&A options for capital raise and clinical trials for CMFI. And, you're also, working on Superconnector and hosting 100 conferences a year, which is a lot. Because I've been involved in the planning of one conference, and that's enough. So, like, how do you juggle all this stuff? How do you navigate like all these different ventures and these, because these undertakings, these tasks are not small. So how do you do this?
I'm not hosting 100 events a year. I don't know where you got that. So I started that high tech prayer breakfast, and it's in DC. I didn't go to the last one. The first time in 22 years I didn't go. It is established, and there's a team running it. I stood up this thing called the Sunday Service at South by Southwest, which turned out to be the largest event at South by Southwest Interactive last year. We had 4,000 people come to our event. And so this year, I was not meant to be managing that event. I was not as involved as I was last year. There was a whole team of 80 people that ran that event, and I don't know how many thousands of people came, but this was literally just ended Sunday, and it was so amazing to go to an event that I started, by the grace of God, and to see it just blow up into this thing that it now is owned by the community, and there was this hunger for a more meaningful event at this secular event. I mean, South by Southwest is an amazing event that has something for everybody except a Sunday service. And so we stood it up, and it attracted people of all different religions and cultures and backgrounds, and everybody just seemed to love it. And in fact, it was going on late into the night when I left, which was really cool. I got to see the videos and pictures the next day. So look, I don't personally do all of these things. Some of them I get started, and others take them and run with them. And so, I think replacing yourself is important, and realizing when you're not the guy to be doing every little bit of the whole thing. Like CMFI, we have a management team in place. We have a CEO who runs that. I'm chairman of the board. I make the connections, but then I pass them off to the CEO, and he takes them from there. I've also got a great board of directors. And so it's not all me doing all of these things.
And it never is. In fact, I don't think that, and by the way, your team told us that Super Connector has the goal of doing 100 conferences this year. I don't think we're suggesting you're hosting them yourself, but
Right.
Super Connector is representing that as a target for the year in our notes. Is that not? And I think we got that right, or at least that's the notes.
Yeah,
we
that's
got.
right. And that was the notion there was putting business development professionals at conferences around the world to represent companies. So if you had a business and you wanted to have a presence in China or Saudi Arabia, and you don't want to physically travel there yourself or send a team there, for a fraction of the price of sending that person there, we could put a local on the ground there, have them connect with you by Zoom, hear what you want to say, and go and be your eyes and ears on the conference floor. That was the notion.
Gotcha. Well, I do want to very quickly, before I get to our last question, touch on what you just said about, essentially needing to replace yourself. And that's difficult for a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly when you're just getting started. The idea that the business could ever operate without you at the helm is scary, it's disorienting, and it seems far-fetched. But the truth of the matter is, if you're building a business, you have to be thinking about what it looks like without you there. And if the business depends on you to the extent that it cannot run without you, in all probability, you've become a slave to the business as opposed to the business being something that drives your life. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that living an abundant life in your mind does not include being a slave to your business.
No, it doesn't. And in fact, even with capital raise, my son and I have talked. I was the person to start the business and be the CEO for the initial investors, but honestly, I'm not the guy to take it to the next level. So I am looking for somebody to come in who's had an exit, who knows what they're doing, to take it and make it better than it is today. And so I am happy to hand these things off. Even with these disease cures, I don't need to take credit for any of this stuff. I'm happy to hand it off and let somebody else take the credit and glory. I just wanted to get it out there. And so, no, living an abundant life includes a day of rest. And I'm looking very forward to Saturday, where I'm going to do nothing. I literally, I have to get my hair cut. That's about the only thing I'm doing. I mean, no work. I'm going to watch a couple TV shows, have a movie night with my wife. You've got to take time to just unplug. And if you don't take a day of rest, I mean, even God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. I mean, we were wired to rest, at least one day a week.
And real quick, your wife is doing fine. She's she's all cured, and the kids are all good.
Everybody's good. Yeah, everybody is 100% back. It doesn't mean that people don't have challenges, life's challenges. If it's not one thing, it's another. But no, nobody's sick anymore. Thank God.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So we're going to wind up with this incredible anecdote. I mean, you know, I'm from Israel, and one of the stories that you shared was that you were once locked in the tomb of a pharaoh in the Valley of the Kings. And on that same trip, you were strip searching an Israeli airport. I'd love to know why you were strip searched, but maybe start with the tomb of the pharaoh. And what the heck did that feel like to be locked in it?
All right, this is a funny story. So I was in the Valley of the Kings with my buddy Omar, who was showing me around Egypt, and so it's close to 5 o'clock. We're down all the way in the bottom of a tomb, and something, looked at the watch. I said, it's 5 o'clock. When do they close these things? I said, maybe we better go. He goes, oh no, they wouldn't close up with us still being in here. So I said, well, I think we probably ought to go. These guys are probably going to go home, and so we go walking up this long pathway to get to this iron gate, that they close these things. And as we're going up the final stretch, the lights go out and this iron door, boom, it shuts. And I'm panicked, right? I don't know when this thing's going to open. And so we just didn't say anything to each other.
1,000 years, Carl.
Right. I didn't know, but we were beating on this iron door. And, if you could have seen the guy on the other side of that door, he was wearing the turban. He'd been out in the sun for, decades, shriveled up skin, old guy. He opens the thing up and he goes, ah. I wanted to kill him. It wasn't funny. I don't know how long I was in there. It seemed like forever, long enough for me to, envision tarantulas crawling on me and stuff. So anyways, that was an adventure for sure. And then when I went to Israel, I didn't know anything about anything. I was a brand new believer. I had read the Bible and I knew Israel was important. I knew that, Jesus, he appeared in Israel on the scene. And other than that, I didn't know anything, right? I didn't even know they spoke Hebrew over there. I was really kind of a 20-something knucklehead. And so I told my buddy Omar, I said, I got to see Israel. And so we jumped in his Jeep and we drove across the Sinai Desert. I don't think you could do that today. I think you'd probably get killed crossing the Sinai Desert, but we did. And that was an adventure in and of itself. But when I got to the border, they wouldn't let him cross the border because he's Egyptian. And so they let me cross the border. I crossed the border at 11:30 at night by myself. And I didn't know, I didn't have a plan. I literally, I saw a woman wearing a Michigan sweatshirt and I said, hey, are you from the US? And she goes, well, kind of, and I said, how can I get to Jerusalem? I said, can I rent a car? She goes, you'll probably get killed. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I get to Jerusalem? She goes, there's an airport over there. So like an idiot, I go to the airport. This is in Eilat.
Eilat Airport? Yeah.
Eilat
Okay.
Airport.
It's a very small airport.
Well, yeah. So like an idiot town. I asked for a ticket to Jerusalem and they're like, there's not an airport in Jerusalem.
Right.
Because I didn't know, right? And so I'm like, well, how close can you get me? And they said Tel Aviv. Look, I'm not stupid anymore. I've been back. Like, I know the drill, but back then I didn't know. And so I get there, I get this ticket to Tel Aviv, and I go to the counter and they start interrogating me. And so apparently the story I had wasn't, it wasn't checking out, right? My buddy Omar left me at the border, and I told him if I'm not back by tomorrow at 5, I'm probably dead. So just go back without me. This is literally what I'm telling this person. I'm telling the truth. And
right.
It didn't sound too good.
In that
right?
case, the truth wasn't going to set you free. It might have even gotten you arrested.
No, and then they kept asking me the same questions over and over and over. And I'm like, why are you harassing me? I'm an American. I'm your friend. I knew that much. And I guess when I questioned what they were doing, then I found myself in the back room with automatic weapons pointed at me and literally, drop your pants, bend over, and they were checking, the cavity search. It was very scary. I was terrified because I knew that the Israelis weren't playing around and that I was in a predicament, and I didn't know what they were going to do. And they saw me shaking, and they said, where are you staying tonight? Who are you staying with? I said, I don't know. Right. I didn't have a plan.
You have to admit you were a little suspicious. You were asking to fly to Jerusalem where there was no airport.
I would have
presumed you didn't
myself,
have a whole
yeah.
lot with you. Right. Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say.
No, they took the 2 liquids that I had with me and they said, calm down. We're holding the airplane. for you. And so I made it, and I got to see Jerusalem and do everything. Oh, and they tore all my stuff apart, coming and going, my shoes, my camera. I mean, exposed all my film. It was really kind of a miserable experience. So
well,
the moral of the story
the
is, if
Israeli
you go,
tourism industry is not going to like this this interview, but hey, you know what?
but
It is what it
Cal,
is.
the second time I went as a guest of the Jewish Agency for Israel. And it was funny because my daughter was with me. I'm like, hey, this could be rough. Like, I'm telling her about my last experience. And we walked in like we owned the place. I mean, because we had a proper invitation, and we got tours everywhere, and, got the VIP treatment. So if you go the proper way. Don't, sneak in through Egypt, fly in, from the US, and have a proper, invitation or tour or something.
And know that there's no airport in Jerusalem probably would help a little.
Yeah, that helps, right? Yeah,
I got to say, when I woke up this morning, hearing a story about a full cavity search was not on the old to-do list. I didn't realize I was going to be a part of
It wasn't.
No,
You are.
and you know
PJ.
me, I should have actually had that on the list.
If we played bingo, I mean, there have been such wild things that we've heard on episodes. We had a recent episode, we haven't even aired it yet, where I believe cutting off a penis came up, and I PJ and I communicated during the episode, and I said, did that just happen? He said, as a matter of fact, it did. Yeah. And how that happens, I cannot tell you, but hey, well, we've heard.
Thank goodness I didn't experience that. It was just a cavity search, and
indeed,
I passed.
Thank goodness for that.
Passed the cavity search, and I flew there, and I got back, and I got back home. It all worked out. It was just terrifying.
Well, our guest today was Carl Grant III. He's a hell of a nice guy, and he's also a very accomplished businessman and an author. His book, How to Live the Abundant Life, is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. We are going to post both his Instagram and his LinkedIn in our episode show notes for anyone that is interested in getting a hold of Carl. Carl, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Continued good health to your family and continued success to you.
Thanks, Tal. Thanks, PJ. It's been fun.
Thank you for curing Lyme disease. That's awesome.